My son texted, "Stop calling me. I'm tired of you and your requests." I didn't reply. 2 months later, he called. "Mom, my wife and I urgently need money for rent." I refused. The next morning, "Good day, dear listeners. It's Louisa again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I used to think that getting older meant getting quieter, smaller, that the world would gradually pull back from you the way a tide pulls back from the shore. I never imagined it would be my own son who would do the pulling. My name is Margaret Harmon. Everyone who loves me calls me Peggy. I'm 68 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom house in Columbus, Ohio, and for 31 years I worked as a certified public accountant. I raised Derek on my own after his father passed. Cancer, 2003, swift and merciless. And I did it without asking anyone for a single thing. I paid off the mortgage in 2019. I have savings. I have a pension. I have a vegetable garden in the backyard that produces more zucchini than any one woman could reasonably eat. By any measure that matters, I built a good life. Derek was my pride. Not because he was perfect, he wasn't, not even close, but because he was mine. I watched him learn to ride a bike on our cracked driveway. I stayed up past midnight helping him with college applications. When he called me crying at 26 because he'd been laid off, I drove 4 hours to take him to dinner and never once said I told you so. That was the kind of mother I tried to be. Present, steady, a soft place to land. He met Cassandra at 37. She was beautiful in the way that some women are beautiful, like a trap is beautiful. All gleam and geometry. She had dark hair, perfect posture, and a way of entering a room that made you feel somehow, like she'd already assessed everyone in it. Derek brought her to Thanksgiving that first year, and she sat at my table, complimented my sweet potato casserole, and looked at my house with eyes I didn't yet know how to read. The changes came slowly. That's the thing about slow changes. You keep explaining them away. Derek started calling less. Once a week became every other week. He stopped coming for Easter. Then Christmas became just the two of us this year, Mom. Cassie's really overwhelmed with work. I told myself couples needed space. I told myself I didn't want to be one of those mothers. I told myself a lot of things. But there were details I couldn't explain away so easily. Little things. The way Cassandra answered Derek's phone once when I called and said he was unavailable, without offering to have him call back. The time I drove to their apartment in Cincinnati, 3 hours, unannounced, yes, my mistake. And Cassandra opened the door with a smile, so controlled it looked painted on. Derek stood behind her in the hallway and didn't step forward to hug me. He just stood there. There was the Christmas gift situation. I sent them a check for $500. Money I could afford. Money I wanted to give freely. Cassandra texted me, not Derek, to say they'd received it. No thank you. No call, a text. And then, 6 weeks later, Derek called asking if I could help out with a car repair. The number was $800. I sent it. I told myself he was just struggling, the way young people struggle. I told myself generosity was its own reward. What I didn't tell myself was what I actually felt, that I was being managed, kept at arm's length except when something was needed. That my son, my boy, who used to fall asleep on my shoulder watching old westerns, had been quietly, methodically repositioned in relation to me. Not cut off, that would have been cleaner. Just tilted, angled away. I kept calling. Every Sunday, 10 o'clock in the morning, the same time we'd talked his whole adult life. Sometimes he answered. More often it went to voicemail. I left messages that grew shorter over time because I could hear, even in my own voice, the quality of someone trying not to sound desperate. And then came the text. I had called 3 Sundays in a row without an answer. The 4th Sunday I called, and then 20 minutes later, sent a short message. Just checking in, honey. Hope you're well. Call when you can. I set my phone on the kitchen counter and went to water my tomatoes. When I came back inside, there was a reply, not a call, a text. I read it standing in my kitchen with dirt on my gloves and the afternoon light coming through the yellow curtains my husband had always hated and I had always loved. Stop calling me. I'm tired of you and your constant requests. I read it twice, then a third time. Then I set my phone face down on the counter, walked to the living room, sat in the armchair by the window, and did not move for a very long time. Constant requests. I had asked for nothing, not one thing. Every request in the history of our relationship had traveled in the opposite direction. But that wasn't even the part that cut deepest. The part that cut deepest was the word tired. He was tired of me. I didn't respond. Not that day. Not the next week. Not the week after that. I closed the door on that conversation the way you close a door on a room where something is broken. I waited. 2 months. I want you to understand what 2 months of silence from your only child feels like when you are 68 and widowed and the house gets quiet at 4 in the afternoon in a way that has no bottom to it. I did not fall apart. I want to be clear about that. I cried once, the night after the text, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold. I let myself have that, and then I put it away. What I did instead was what I had always done when the world handed me something I couldn't immediately understand. I sat down and I looked at the numbers. Not just the financial numbers, though those mattered too. I mean all of it. I got out a yellow legal pad. I've used yellow legal pads my whole career. I find them clarifying. And I started writing, down one side, what I had given. The $500 Christmas check. The $800 for the car repair. Before that, $3,000 when Derek and Cassandra first moved to Cincinnati and needed a security deposit plus first and last month's rent. Before that, $1,400 for a dental procedure Cassandra needed that her insurance hadn't covered. Further back, the co-signing on Derek's first car loan. The $2,000 I gave them as a wedding gift, cash, because Cassandra had said, quietly, almost offhandedly, that they were a little stretched. Total, across 4 years of their marriage, a little over $9,000. Not a fortune, but not nothing. Down the other side, what I had received. Birthday cards for the first 2 years. A phone call on Mother's Day last year, 11 minutes long, during which Cassandra had spoken for approximately 8 of those minutes about a promotion she was expecting at work. A photograph, texted to me, of their cat sitting in a sunbeam. That was the sum of it. I looked at that legal pad for a long time. Then I wrote at the bottom, "This is not a relationship. This is a transaction. And I have been the only one paying." Here is what scared me, truly scared me, in those weeks of silence. Not the loss of Derek's presence, though that ache was real. What scared me was the future I could see clearly if I let things continue on the same trajectory. I was 68. In 10 years, I'd be 78. In 15, if I was lucky, still managing my own affairs. I had a house worth $240,000. I had retirement savings. I had assets that would eventually need to go somewhere. And Cassandra knew that. I realized, sitting in my kitchen with my legal pad, that Cassandra had always known that. The early warmth, the compliments at Thanksgiving, the carefully expressed interest in my work history, the questions about the house. None of it had been affection. It had been reconnaissance. She had spent 4 years softening the ground, slowly pulling Derek away from me so that when the time came, I would be isolated, dependent, grateful for any scrap of contact. The kind of old woman who writes checks just to hear her son's voice. The text wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was a recalibration. She had decided I was calling too much, maintaining too much presence. And Derek, her Derek, the version she'd shaped over 4 years, had been deployed to push me back. I almost let it work. That's the part that shamed me most when I let myself look at it clearly. For those first weeks, I had almost gone quiet. Almost accepted the smaller, further away version of my son that was being offered to me. Almost begun the long process of shrinking, but I had been a CPA for 31 years. I knew how accounts worked. I knew that unchallenged debits compound. And I knew that the time to correct a ledger is before the damage becomes irreversible. So I made a decision. I was going to protect myself, not out of anger, or not only out of anger, but out of clear-eyed self-preservation. I was going to update my will. I was going to consult an estate planning attorney. I was going to document everything: the money given, the dates, the amounts, the context. I was going to make sure that no one, not Cassandra, not Derek in his current diminished form, could make a claim on what I had built by myself, for myself, over a lifetime of work. And I was going to do all of this quietly, without announcing it, without giving anyone the opportunity to perform remorse or manufacture a reconciliation designed to head me off. I wrote on the legal pad, Step 1, call Patricia Owens. Patricia was an estate attorney I'd known professionally for 15 years. Sharp, thorough, not given to sentiment. Exactly what I needed. I tore the page out of the pad, folded it, and put it in my cardigan pocket. The next morning, my phone rang. The screen said, Derek. I let it ring. Then a voicemail. Mom, hey, it's me. Listen, Cassie and I are in a little bit of a tough spot with rent this month, and we were wondering if you could help us out. It's kind of urgent. Call me back. I stood in my kitchen and listened to the whole message. Then I set the phone back on the counter. I thought, of course. And then I thought, not this time. I called Patricia Owens that same morning. Her office was in a brick building downtown, 3rd floor, with a view of the Scioto River that she'd probably stopped seeing years ago, the way you stop seeing things that are always there. I'd referred clients to her twice over the years. She knew my name, knew my background, and when I explained, briefly, without drama, what I wanted, she didn't ask unnecessary questions. She said, come in Thursday at 2. I spent the 2 days before that appointment organizing. I pulled bank records. I printed email confirmations from wire transfers. I found the text messages where Derek had made the requests for money, and I screenshotted each one, then emailed them to myself so they existed somewhere beyond my phone. The co-signing paperwork for the car loan I found in a manila folder in my filing cabinet, right where it had always been, filed under D 31 years as an accountant. I did not misplace documents. By Wednesday evening, I had a folder 2 inches thick. I looked at it on my kitchen table and felt something I hadn't expected. Not grief, but clarity. The kind of clarity you get when you stop arguing with reality and start working with it. Patricia's office was calm and wood-paneled and smelled faintly of coffee. She read through my documents with the focused stillness of someone who processed other people's family disasters for a living and had long ago learned to do so without flinching. When she finished, she took off her reading glasses and set them on the desk. You want to restructure your estate plan entirely, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. I want Derek removed as primary beneficiary. I want the house placed in a revocable living trust with me as trustee. I want my niece Linda named as successor trustee and primary beneficiary. And I want it done properly so that it cannot be challenged later on grounds of undue influence or diminished capacity. I said that last part deliberately. I had done my reading. Patricia nodded slowly. The trust structure is smart, and establishing your current competency on the record is wise. She paused. Has anything happened that makes you concerned about pressure from Derek or his wife in the near term? I told her about the text. I showed it to her on my phone. I told her about the voicemail requesting rent money, left the morning after a 2-month silence. Patricia looked at the text, then at me, then back at the text. And you haven't responded to either? No. Good, she said. Keep it that way until we have documents in place. We spent 90 minutes working through the structure. I left with a legal pad full of notes, my own, the yellow kind, and an appointment for the following Friday to review a first draft. I was in the parking garage, keys in hand, when my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. I almost dismissed it. Then I read it. Mrs. Harmon, you don't know me. My name is Jennifer Castillo. I used to work with Cassandra at Meridian Group before she was let go last year. I've been wanting to reach out to you for a while. There are things you should probably know. I'm sorry if this is out of line. I sat in my car in the parking garage for a moment. The concrete around me was gray and low, and the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above the empty space next to me. Was this a setup? Cassandra testing me? I considered it. But I also knew, with the instinct of a woman who had spent 31 years assessing whether numbers were telling her the truth, that the message had the texture of something genuine. It was uncertain. It apologized. It didn't ask for anything. I typed, Jennifer, I appreciate you reaching out. I'm open to talking. Can you tell me a little more about what this concerns? Her reply came in 4 minutes. It's about Cassandra and your son, and some things she said about you and your house at work before she was let go. I don't want to get into it over text. Could we talk by phone? Or meet somewhere? My hands were steady on the steering wheel. Outside the garage, Columbus went about its afternoon. I thought about Cassandra sitting at my Thanksgiving table 7 years ago, complimenting my casserole, looking at my house with those careful eyes. I thought about the word reconnaissance. I typed back, yes, let's meet. Are you available this Saturday? Then I sat there a moment longer before I started the car. I was past the point of pretending this was a misunderstanding. I was past the point of hoping that Derek would wake up on his own, that love would be sufficient, that family would mean what it was supposed to mean. Something had been happening in my life for years. Now I was going to find out exactly what it was, and then I was going to deal with it. Jennifer Castillo was smaller than I'd imagined. Early 30s, dark eyes, the kind of careful composure that comes from being nervous and trying not to show it. We met at a diner on the east side, her suggestion, neutral ground, and she was already in the booth when I arrived, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, a manila envelope on the table in front of her. I sat down across from her and said, "Thank you for coming." "I almost didn't," she said. "I kept thinking it wasn't my business." "What changed your mind?" She looked at the envelope. "My mother is 64. When I thought about someone doing this to her," she stopped. "I couldn't just not say anything." What Jennifer told me over the next 40 minutes arranged itself in my mind with the awful coherence of a spreadsheet that has finally been balanced. Cassandra had worked at Meridian Group, a small financial consulting firm, for 2 years before being terminated for cause. Jennifer was careful about the details, but the phrase she used was misappropriation of client funds, small amounts, caught before it became catastrophic. That termination had never shown up in any conversation Derek had with me. As far as I'd known, Cassandra had left Meridian for better opportunities. But more relevant to me was what Jennifer described from the office. Cassandra had spoken about Derek's mother, about me, with a specificity that had struck Jennifer as strange at the time. She'd mentioned the house, the approximate neighborhood, the fact that I was a widow with no other children. She'd mentioned more than once that I was getting older and not as sharp as I used to be, a characterization that had puzzled Jennifer, who'd never met me, but which she now understood as groundwork. Cassandra had also mentioned, casually, that Derek was the only heir to my estate. And once? Jennifer paused here, looked me in the eye, then looked away. Cassandra had said to a colleague, "It's just a matter of time before we're managing that house. You just have to be patient with old people." I didn't react visibly. That was a skill I'd learned young and kept sharp. Do you have anything in writing? I asked. Jennifer opened the envelope. Inside were 2 printed emails forwarded to her personal account before she left Meridian. She'd anticipated she might need them someday. In one, Cassandra had written to a colleague asking for advice on whether a future inheritance could be protected from probate if a parent was still living. In the other, she'd asked about the legal implications of being named a co-trustee on an elderly parent's accounts. She had written these emails while married to my son, while sitting at my Thanksgiving table, while accepting my checks. I thanked Jennifer. I told her I might need to contact her again. She said she understood. We paid for our own coffees and walked out into the gray Ohio morning. The following Friday, I sat in Patricia Owen's office and signed the documents. The Revocable Living Trust was established. My niece, Linda, who lived in Portland, who called me every week without being asked, who had never once hinted at inheritance, was named successor trustee. Derek was removed as beneficiary. The house, the retirement accounts, the savings, restructured, protected, documented. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in years. That lightness lasted 4 days. On Tuesday morning, Derek called. When I answered, his voice had a quality I hadn't heard before. Tight, rehearsed, with Cassandra's cadence underneath his own. Mom, we need to talk about what you've been doing. What do you mean? I kept my voice even. We got a letter from some attorney named Owens about your estate. A pause. What did you do? I had expected this. Patricia had mentioned that certain legal filings create paper trails. I updated my estate planning, I said. I'm 68. It was time. You removed me. Not a question. I made decisions about my own property, yes. What followed was 20 minutes that I will not fully reconstruct here, because to do so would be to give it more power than it deserves. Derek said I was being vindictive. He said I was punishing him for setting a boundary. He said the text had been sent in a moment of stress, and that I was destroying the family over nothing. Cassandra's voice appeared in the background, and then she was on the phone herself. Her composure gone for the first time I could remember, her voice carrying the edge of something real and ugly underneath the usual polish. She told me I was a bitter old woman. She told me I had always resented her. She told me that if I continued down this path, she would advise Derek to pursue legal action. She didn't specify what kind, because there was no kind, but she said it the way people say things they know sound frightening even when they're empty. I let her finish. Then I said calmly, Cassandra, I'm going to end this call now. Any further communication regarding legal matters can be directed to Patricia Owens' office. I'll give you her number. Silence. Then the call ended. I sat in my kitchen with the phone on the table and let myself breathe for a moment. My hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear, or not only from fear. From the effort of steadiness. It costs something, holding yourself together under pressure, even when you know you're right. They didn't call back that day or the next. I gave myself the rest of that week. I worked in the garden. I called my niece Linda and talked for an hour without mentioning any of it, just because I needed a conversation that had nothing to do with any of this. I slept 8 hours a night. I was not done. But for now, I let myself rest. The gift arrived on a Wednesday. A flower arrangement, lilies and white roses, my favorites, which told me Cassandra had done her research at some point, because Derek hadn't known my favorite flowers since he was 9. The card read, Thinking of you. Love, Derek. No mention of the call. No apology. No acknowledgement of anything that had happened. Just flowers. Just love, Derek. As though we were ordinary people having an ordinary week. I put them in a vase because they were flowers, and flowers deserved water. But I looked at them with the same eyes I'd used in Patricia Owens's office. 2 days later, a gift basket arrived. Artisan crackers, 3 kinds of jam, a small wheel of cheese, a jar of local honey. A note: Mom, I've been thinking a lot. I'd love to get together soon. D. I did not respond. The following week, Derek texted, I know things have been tense. Can we get lunch? Just us? I looked at that message for a long time. There was a version of me, the version that had driven 4 hours unannounced to Cincinnati, the version that had left Sunday voicemails and watched her phone, that wanted badly to say yes, that wanted to believe just us meant something had shifted, that the son I remembered had surfaced through whatever had been built over him. But I had worked with numbers my whole life. I knew the difference between a genuine correction and a strategic one. And I knew that these gestures, the flowers, the basket, the careful text, had appeared within days of the legal documents being signed and sent. The timing was not coincidental. The timing was the message. I typed, Derek, I love you. I'm not ready to talk right now. I need more time. I sent it and put the phone away. The gifts stopped after that. The texts became less frequent, and I could feel it, that particular quality of surveillance, of being watched from a distance to see what I would do next. It had a texture to it. You learn at 68 to recognize when you're being assessed. I let them watch. What I did during those weeks was something I should have done earlier. I called people. My niece Linda already knew pieces of it. I told her the rest. She was quiet for a while, and then she said, Aunt Peggy, I've been worried about you for 2 years and I didn't know how to say it without sounding like I was overstepping. We talked for 2 hours. She offered to fly out. I said not yet, but maybe soon. I called my friend Dorothy, who I'd worked with for 12 years before she retired. Dorothy had raised 3 children, buried a husband, and put a fraudulent contractor in small claims court at the age of 64, and won. She was not a woman who was easily alarmed, and she was not alarmed now. Good, she said when I told her about the trust. About time you stopped leaving the door unlocked. I joined a group. This surprised me, but it was Dorothy's suggestion. A support group for older adults dealing with family estrangement. It met Thursday evenings at a community center 10 minutes from my house. I expected it to feel sad. It did not feel sad. It felt like a room full of people who had stopped pretending. There was a woman named Grace who hadn't spoken to her daughter in 3 years after the daughter had tried to have her declared incompetent. There was a man named Harold, 73, who'd changed his will after his son's second wife had started showing up unannounced at his bank. Each of them had made a decision. Each of them had survived it. I didn't talk much the first Thursday. I listened. I let their experiences settle into me the way rain settles into dry ground. On the drive home, I thought about something Harold had said, almost offhandedly. The hardest part wasn't doing the thing. The hardest part was giving myself permission. I had given myself permission. I had done it sitting in a parking garage with a stranger's text on my phone. But I needed to hear someone else say it out loud. I needed to be in a room where my decisions didn't require defending. That Thursday group became a fixed point in my week, an anchor. And while I was building those anchors, the attorney, the trust, Linda, Dorothy, the group, I knew that Derek and Cassandra were not idle. I knew they were regrouping. I knew that the flowers and the gift basket had been the first move and that a second move was coming. I was right. They showed up on a Sunday. I hadn't told them to come, but I also hadn't told them not to, and they knew where I lived. The doorbell rang at 11 in the morning, and when I looked through the window before answering, I saw Derek's car in my driveway and felt something in my chest tighten. a complicated muscle memory. I opened the door. Derek looked tired. That part, at least, seemed real. There were shadows under his eyes that I recognized. He'd had them as a teenager when he was carrying something he didn't know how to put down. Cassandra stood beside him in a soft gray cardigan, her face arranged into an expression of careful humility that I might have found convincing 3 years ago. "Mom," Derek said, "can we come in?" I stepped back from the door. I made coffee because making coffee gave my hands something to do. We sat at the kitchen table, the three of us, in a room where I had taught Derek to add fractions and written thank you notes after his father's funeral. The flowers from 2 weeks ago were still on the counter, slightly past their prime. Cassandra spoke first. She was good at that, taking the initiative, establishing the frame. "Peggy," she said, and the use of my name had a studied warmth to it, the warmth of someone who had practiced. "I want to apologize. I know things have been really hard between us. I know I haven't always made it easy for you and Derek to have the relationship you deserve." She paused in the right place. "I've been doing a lot of reflecting." I held my coffee cup in both hands and looked at her steadily. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. Derek leaned forward. "Mom, we're not here to fight. We miss you. We want things to go back to how they were." He glanced at Cassandra, a quick reflex he probably didn't notice. "And we were hoping you might reconsider some of the legal decisions you made. We're not trying to pressure you. We just think you may have acted out of hurt, and we get that. And we think if we could all just—" "Derek," I said. He stopped. "What you're describing is going back to how things were. Can you tell me what you mean by that? Specifically?" He shifted. "Just, being in each other's lives, talking, seeing each other." "And the estate documents?" Silence. A specific kind of silence. Cassandra recovered first. "We're not asking you to do anything that isn't in your heart, Peggy. We just think decisions that affect all of us should maybe be made when things are calmer. When there's more—" She searched for the word. "Trust." There it was, dressed in the language of reconciliation, of family, of let's all be reasonable. But the architecture underneath it was clear. They wanted the documents reversed. They wanted to re-establish themselves in my estate plan. Everything else, the apologies, the gray cardigan, the studied humility, was in service of that. I looked at my son. Not at the version Cassandra had shaped over 4 years, at Derek. The boy who'd cried at his father's memorial and held my hand too tight. I let myself feel the grief of that for exactly 1 moment. Then I set down my coffee cup. "I love you, Derek," I said. "That's not in question. But the decisions I made about my own property were not made out of hurt or confusion. They were made carefully, with legal counsel, in full possession of my faculties. They are not going to be reversed." Cassandra's expression changed, just slightly. The careful humility thinned. "Peggy, we came here in good faith." "I know you did," I said. "And I'm telling you, in good faith, that this conversation isn't going to produce the outcome you're hoping for. My estate plan reflects my wishes. If those wishes change, I'll make changes. They haven't changed." Derek stood up abruptly. His chair scraped. "So that's it. We come all the way out here. We try to fix things, and you just sit there? I made you coffee," I said. "You're welcome to finish it." Cassandra touched Derek's arm. A signal. Don't. She rose more slowly, with the controlled grace of someone recalculating. "We'll give you more time," she said. Her voice was pleasant now in the way that very cold things are smooth. "I hope you'll think about what really matters here." I walked them to the door. I watched Derek's car back out of my driveway and disappear down the street. Then I closed the door and I stood in my hallway with my back against it, and I let my heart pound for a minute. because I'd be lying if I said I wasn't afraid. They were not done. I could feel that in the particular quality of Cassandra's last look, the one she'd given me from the passenger seat of the car, her face turned back toward my house. But the fear did something unexpected. It sharpened me. It reminded me that this was real, that the stakes were real, and that I was the only person standing between myself and what they intended. I pushed off the wall and went to call Linda. The letter from their attorney arrived on a Thursday morning in early March. I say their attorney because the letterhead was from a firm I didn't recognize. Pratt and Voss, a small practice in Cincinnati. The letter was 2 pages. I read it at my kitchen table with a second cup of coffee. The morning light coming through the yellow curtains. The house quiet around me in the way it had learned to be quiet since I'd stopped waiting for it to feel otherwise. The substance of it was this: Derek, as my son and previously named beneficiary, wished to contest the recent changes to my estate plan on the grounds that the modifications had been made under conditions that suggested undue influence by third parties, specifically by a person described obliquely as a non-family advisor, and that there were questions about whether the decisions reflected my genuine wishes or were the product of diminished cognitive capacity. They were claiming I was losing my mind. I read that phrase, diminished cognitive capacity, and felt something move through me. Not quite anger, colder than anger. The emotion of a woman who has spent a lifetime being precise and who has just been accused of imprecision in the service of someone else's financial interest. I had balanced ledgers for 31 years. I had filed accurate tax returns for clients whose lives were complicated and whose paperwork was a mess, and I had never once made an error that cost someone money. And Cassandra was claiming I couldn't manage my own affairs. I set the letter on the table, squared its edges against the tabletop, and picked up the phone. I called Patricia that same afternoon. She had already received a copy. "This is a nuisance filing," she said, her voice measured. "They have no evidence of undue influence or cognitive decline, but it creates paperwork, and they know that. They're hoping you'll find it easier to simply reverse the trust than to defend it." "I'm not going to do that," I said. "I didn't think you were." A pause. "Peggy, do you still have those emails from Jennifer Castillo?" "Yes." "And her contact information?" "Yes." "Then I think it's time we responded in a way that makes clear this strategy is going to be more costly to them than to you." What followed was 3 weeks of legal motion that I will not reconstruct in full because it was, in Patricia's word, tedious. The word lawyers use for things that are exhausting but manageable. Patricia filed a formal response. She submitted documentation of my estate planning process, dates, my recorded cognitive assessments, her own professional notes establishing my clear instruction at every step. She attached a letter from my physician confirming my physical and cognitive health, which I had requested 2 weeks earlier precisely because I had anticipated that something like this might come. She noted, pointedly, the timeline, that the filing had occurred within weeks of Derek and Cassandra being notified of the trust changes, after years during which no such concerns about my capacity had ever been raised by anyone. Not once. In 68 years of life, not one person, not a doctor, not a colleague, not a neighbor, not a friend, had ever expressed concern about my mental acuity. The suggestion was not only false, it was transparent. Then Patricia sent a letter to Pratt and Voss that contained 2 things. The first, copies of the emails Jennifer Castillo had provided, including Cassandra's message to a colleague asking about controlling an inheritance while a parent was still living, and the second email in which she'd inquired about co-trusteeship on an elderly parent's accounts. The second, A formal notice that should the challenge to my estate proceed, my legal team intended to introduce evidence regarding Cassandra's termination from Meridian Group and the circumstances thereof, including the nature of that termination. We received a response within 10 days. Derek and Cassandra were withdrawing the challenge. But that was not the culmination. The culmination was the phone call. Patricia called me on a Friday afternoon to confirm the withdrawal. But she also told me something else. Apparently, after receiving our response letter, Cassandra had called Pratt and Voss to dispute the emails. She had claimed they were fabricated. She had apparently become agitated on the call. Patricia's source was oblique but reliable, and had said things that caused the firm to question whether she was a client they wished to continue representing. Unwilling to proceed on the basis of fabrication claims they had no way to verify, and increasingly uncertain about the ethics of the situation, Pratt and Voss had withdrawn from representing them entirely before they'd even sent us formal notice of the challenge withdrawal. Cassandra and Derek had lost their attorney. Because of Cassandra. I sat with that for a moment. Then Patricia said, "Jennifer Castillo is willing to give a formal statement if needed." "It won't be needed," I said, "but please thank her." That evening, Derek called me. Not Cassandra. Derek alone. He called at 7:15, and I answered because something in me, some frequency of knowing your own child that you never entirely lose, said this call was different. His voice had shed its rehearsed quality entirely. What was left was rawer and quieter and younger, and more like the voice that used to call me from college at 11 at night when something had gone wrong and he didn't know who else to call. "Mom," he said, "I need to tell you something." I waited. Outside my window, the street was still and orange-lit and ordinary. The letter, the legal thing, that was Cassie's idea. I went along with it because... He stopped. I don't know why I went along with it. That's not true. I know why. I just don't know how to explain it. "You don't have to explain it tonight," I said. "I think she's been..." Another pause. Long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "I think she's been managing me for a long time, and I knew it, somewhere, and I just kept not dealing with it. I kept telling myself I was choosing, but I wasn't really choosing. I was just going along. I didn't say, I know. I didn't say I've known for years, even though both things were true. I said, Derek, that's a hard thing to see about your own life. It takes courage to look at it." "Yeah." His voice was rough with something he was holding back. "Mom, I'm sorry about the text, the one I sent. I've thought about it every day since." I closed my eyes briefly. "I know," I said, and this time I let it mean what it meant. "I'm in my car, outside the apartment. I wasn't ready to go back in yet. I thought about my son sitting in a parking lot in Cincinnati in the dark, 41 years old, having finally looked at something clearly after years of looking away. "Okay," I said. "I'm here. Talk as long as you want." Derek left Cassandra in April. He didn't call to announce it dramatically. He texted me one Sunday morning. A Sunday, the old time, 10 o'clock, as though some muscle memory of us had quietly survived everything, and said, "Mom, I moved out. I'm staying with a friend from work. I'm okay. Can we talk this week?" I put the phone down and went outside and stood in my backyard with my hand on the fence post and the April air cold and clean against my face, and I just breathed for a moment. The way you breathe when something you've been bracing against for a long time finally, gently, stops pressing. We talked that Wednesday. He drove to Columbus and I made dinner. Nothing dramatic, chicken and roasted vegetables. The kind of meal I'd made 1,000 times in that kitchen, in that house, for people I loved. And we sat at the table in the ordinary way of two people who are trying to find their footing with each other again. He didn't make a speech. He didn't arrive with flowers or rehearsed contrition. He sat down, looked at me directly, and said, "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't cover it." And I said, "It's a start. That's all it has to be tonight." That was enough. Recovery is not a ceremony. It is a series of ordinary Wednesdays, each one slightly less careful than the one before. Over the following weeks, in bits and pieces, he told me how it had happened. The slow erosion. How Cassandra had, from very early in their relationship, established herself as the person who understood things better than he did, who read people more accurately, who saw through situations more clearly, who had always just a slightly more sophisticated interpretation of every person in his life, including me. Over years, it had become his habit to see through her eyes, to outsource his own judgment without noticing he was doing it. By the time he recognized what the habit had cost him, it was as though he'd borrowed someone else's glasses for so long, he'd genuinely forgotten what his own vision was. He found a therapist in Cincinnati, a man named Dr. Ellison, and he started going every week. He told me about it plainly, without defensiveness or embarrassment, and I took that directness as a sign that something had genuinely cracked open and light was getting in. I did not restore him to my estate plan. Not yet, and perhaps not ever in the same proportion as before. I want to be clear that this is not punishment. It is recalibration. 31 years as an accountant taught me that trust is an asset, and assets are rebuilt over time through consistent, demonstrated behavior, not restored by declaration, however sincere. Derek understood this. He didn't ask. What happened to Cassandra was not my doing, and I mean that precisely. The withdrawal of the estate challenge had required certain disclosures in its documentation. When Pratt and Voss withdrew, they did so on the record. When the emails Jennifer had provided were copied to Cassandra's attorney, those copies became part of a paper trail that existed independent of my intentions. Patricia had been careful, thorough, and scrupulous. She always was. And she had acted entirely within the bounds of appropriate legal practice. What followed was entirely the consequence of Cassandra's own actions and her own prior conduct. A former colleague at Meridian, unrelated to Jennifer, someone who had watched from a distance as Cassandra's name resurfaced in a legal context, came forward with a complaint that had been quietly shelved years earlier. An internal investigation was reopened. I don't know its specific findings, and I did not seek them out. What I know is that by early summer, Derek mentioned, carefully and without relish, that Cassandra had engaged a personal attorney for matters having nothing to do with the estate challenge. By midsummer, from what Derek reluctantly described, her professional situation had become precarious in ways that made finding new employment difficult. The Cincinnati apartment lease was in her name alone. The car payments were in her name. Derek's income, modest, steady, reliable in the way that unspectacular things often are, was no longer part of her household. She had spent years constructing a structure designed to draw from others, from Derek's deference, from my money, from the patience of people who believed in the goodness of family. When the drawing was interrupted, when each source closed, it turned out there was remarkably little structure remaining that was genuinely hers. I did not feel satisfaction about this in the way I might have felt it at 40. What I felt was something closer to the feeling of looking at a balanced set of books after a long audit. Not joy, but resolution. The recognition that the numbers had finally told the truth. My estate remained exactly as I had restructured it. Linda remained successor trustee. The house was mine. The savings were mine. My decisions were mine, as they had always been, and as they would continue to be. In August, Patricia sent me a final billing statement and, on her firm's letterhead, a handwritten note. Congratulations on a thoroughly well-managed situation. You were a model client. I had it framed and put it on my bookshelf next to a photograph of my husband. A steady man, not showy, not loud, but absolutely present when it mattered. I thought he would have found the whole situation grimly unsurprising and would have been quietly proud of how I had moved through it. I thought he probably would have poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon, handed me one without asking, and said simply, "Good." I laughed out loud in my empty living room. It was the first real, unguarded laugh I'd had in a very long time, and it surprised me with how good it felt. By the time autumn came, my life had rearranged itself into something I hadn't expected to feel quite this good. I'm not talking about triumph. Triumphant people exhaust me. There is something ultimately hollow about joy that requires an audience. I'm talking about the quieter thing. What happens when you remove a source of chronic, low-grade vigilance from your life and your nervous system finally, over weeks and months, learns that the threat has passed? Your shoulders come down. You sleep through the night. Sunday mornings, which had been for so long a ritual of waiting and managing disappointment, become simply Sunday mornings again. Coffee and the newspaper and the yard and no particular weight to any of it. My garden did extraordinarily well that autumn. I had more tomatoes than I knew what to do with, more zucchini than was reasonable, and a row of late-season peppers that had no business surviving into October, but did anyway, as though they were making a point. I brought bags of tomatoes to Dorothy and to the community center, where the Thursday group met. And when Linda flew out to visit in mid-October, I filled her suitcase with enough produce that she had to reorganize at the airport. Linda stayed for 9 days. We cooked every evening. Real cooking. The unhurried kind where you open wine before the onions are done and talk while things simmer. We watched old films. She has her mother's taste, which means a preference for slow, dramatic things where nothing explodes, but everything matters. And I found I'd missed having someone in the house who shared my idea of a good evening. We drove out to the farm market on a Saturday and spent 3 hours there without agenda, buying things we didn't entirely need because the morning was good and the company was good, and that was reason enough. On her last evening, sitting on my porch with tea gone slightly cold, she said, "You seem like yourself again." I thought about that for a moment. Then I said, "I think that's exactly right." She reached over and squeezed my hand once, and we sat in the comfortable silence of people who don't need to elaborate. Dorothy and I began walking on Tuesday mornings, 3 miles through Schiller Park, at a pace we both called exercise, and both knew was really just a moving conversation. Dorothy had sharp, cheerful opinions about everything and delivered them without apology, the way only people who have genuinely stopped worrying about being liked can do. She had survived things: a difficult marriage, a prolonged legal battle over a contractor who'd taken her money and disappeared, children who had tested her patience past what she'd believed was possible. She had come out of all of it still fundamentally herself, still laughing, still curious. I found her company sustaining in the way that good company should be sustaining. It built something in me rather than drawing something out. The Thursday evening group continued. I had become, gradually and without planning it, one of the more consistently present members, the kind of person who shows up early and helps arrange chairs. In November, a new woman came, 66 years old, recently estranged from her son after he had sided with his wife in a dispute over the woman's late mother's keepsakes. She sat in the corner with the carefully maintained composure I recognized immediately, the composure of someone who has not yet given themselves permission to acknowledge how much they've been hurt. After the meeting, I went to her and introduced myself and said what no one had said to me in my own early weeks. What happened to you is real, and what you felt about it is right. And you don't have to convince anyone in this room of either of those things. She cried briefly, then apologized for crying, then apologized for apologizing. I told her we had a strict no apology policy at the Thursday group, which wasn't exactly true, but which made her smile. And sometimes a smile is the exact right next step. Derek and I had dinner in Columbus every other Wednesday. It was, in its early form, a careful thing. Two people who shared history and love and recent injury, finding their way back to an ordinary language with each other. We talked about his work. We talked about therapy, which he engaged with seriously, and which seemed, over months, to be doing the slow, unglamorous work of genuine change. He started mentioning things he'd realized about himself, not with confession, but with something closer to curiosity, as though he was becoming interested in his own interior in a way that Cassandra's presence had apparently not encouraged. He talked about his father sometimes. This was new. He had stopped talking about his father sometime in the Cassandra years, as though that part of his personal history had quietly been moved to an unpermitted category. Now he would mention him. A memory, a similarity he'd noticed in himself, a question about what his father had been like before Derek was old enough to ask. I answered as fully as I could. I thought of it as restoring something that had been put in storage without explanation. He had a cat, a gray tabby named Gerald, which he was embarrassed about for the first 2 weeks before finally telling me. I visited the apartment once in November, and Gerald spent the afternoon performing indifference before settling on my feet with the resigned satisfaction of a cat who has decided you're acceptable enough. I drove home from that visit, feeling something I hadn't felt in years about Derek specifically. Hope. Plain, ordinary hope. As for Cassandra, by the time winter came, what Derek knew of her situation was limited, but telling. She had left Cincinnati entirely, returning to the city she'd come from. The professional consequences of the Meridian reinvestigation had followed her in the way such things follow people in connected industries. She was not, as far as anyone knew, doing well. I did not seek this information. I did not dwell on it. It was simply what happened when a structure built on taking from others collapsed under its own logic. I thought sometimes about the woman who had sat at my Thanksgiving table 11 years ago, admiring my casserole, looking at my house with her careful eyes. I wondered what she had actually wanted underneath the strategy. Whether there had been a simpler unhappiness driving all of it, I would never know, and I had made my peace with not knowing. What I knew was what I had. The garden. Dorothy on Tuesdays. Linda's voice on the phone on Sunday evenings. The Thursday group and the new woman who no longer apologized for crying. Derek and Gerald and bi-weekly dinners that were slowly, steadily becoming ordinary in the best possible way. A life that was entirely, unmistakably mine. I spent 68 years being someone's daughter, someone's wife, someone's mother. I loved all of it, but I learned this late, and I wish I'd learned it sooner. Love is not the same thing as endless availability. Boundaries are not punishment. Protecting what you've built is not selfishness. If your name is only remembered when someone needs something from you, that is not love. That is accounting, and you deserve better books. I took my life back, and it was worth every difficult moment. What would you have done in my place? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and thank you, truly, for listening to mine.